here we are. And I have to say, I was thinking about this talk I'm going to give tonight, which I'm calling Loving Lessons from the Vigil. And it just occurred to me how this came about. Sometime in June, Bev gave a talk, not a talk, an announcement before a meeting, IMCC, about the Vigil. And she asked me if I would say a few words right after she did. I said, sure. So I had something prepared to take about a minute and a half. And I launched into it. And lo and behold, what happened? I didn't get more than a few words. My doorbell rang. This was at home. My doorbell rang. And I had to sign off at that time. This is very strange. My doorbell doesn't usually ring at 7:05 in the evening. So I thought, okay, well, I'll do that at another time. And then I thought more about it. And I thought, I have more than a minute and a half to say about the vigil. So that's tonight. I'm saying it tonight. And I thought I wanted to start this talk with a quote from a poem by Amanda Gorman. She is and the poem, by the way, is called Call Us What We Carry. She's a poet, an activist, and she is the youngest person ever to have been the poet laureate at an inauguration and the first person to be named National Youth Poet Laureate. So here's this excerpt. And she said, "We lay down our arms so we can reach out our arms to one another. We seek harm to none and harmony for all. Let the globe, if nothing else, say this is true. That even as we grieved, we grew. That even as we hurt, we hoped. That even as we tired, we tried." And it seemed to me this was a good preface for tonight's talk, Loving Lessons from the Vigil. So following up, as Bev mentioned at the Vigil meets once a week on Wednesdays from 12:30 to 1:30. A group from IMCC attend regularly every Wednesday, and some individuals from other groups as well come. It is, the Vigil is really a witness to the atrocities that happen in Court Square. That's where we meet, Court Square. Historically, the atrocities that happen there, as well as to witness the ongoing racial injustices. So Bev and others have been doing this for 2.5 years now. Last year, I joined the Vigil for several months. And so tonight I want to talk about my experiences there and some of the insights that arose for me. Well, before I do that, I'll just give some background, maybe fill in those of you who don't know, and I'm sure those of you who do know about the Vigil and what it stands for won't mind listening again. First of all, the market in slaves in Charlottesville lasted for over 100 years. And during that period, tens of thousands of people were sold here in town, as well as tens of thousands of people sold on plantations in the area. The slave market sprang up around the courthouse downtown, which is now the Albemarle County Circuit Court. It was built in 1760 by enslaved laborers. The area directly surrounding the courthouse is known as Court Square. In 1820, the building with that now has the address 0 Court Square was built, again with slave labor, and it's located directly across from the courthouse. And to me, that address 0 Court Square carry its own ominous overtones. So slaves were bought and sold at 0 Court Square. And there is some thinking, although apparently no publishing documentation, that they were housed overnight before sale in the basement of 0 Court Square. After individuals were bought They were registered, the sale was registered at the courthouse. So nowadays, bouquets of flowers, not bouquets, but flowers, groups of flowers, adorn the sidewalk in front of Zero Court Square. And these flowers are like flowers on a grave. And they're there all the time. There was also, until a few years ago, a plaque on the Zero Court Square building, marking the building as the site of the slave market. That was removed a couple of years ago. But there are efforts afoot now to install a permanent memorial at Zero Court Square as simply fitting for the history of what went on there. So that's still unresolved. May it happen. Those who participate, I wanted to mention, this information, the historical information, was provided by Freeman Hobbs Allen, who is an activist historian and an independent scholar with the Virginia Foundation of the Humanities. So many thanks to Freeman. Those who participate in the vigil sit on the perimeter of the courthouse. There's a low wall there facing Zero Court Square. So we sit there, or they sit there, or there's a bench right in that area. And some people bring their own chairs, portable chairs. In recognition of the murder of George Floyd by a policeman in 2020, the first 9 minutes and 29 seconds of the vigil are devoted to a standing vigil after that bell is rung. And then you sit or stand as you prefer. So I want to make some general, this is kind of background to the vigil, where it is, kind of put you in the picture. And then I wanted to make some observations about the impact of the presence of the vigil. And it's so easy to think that silence signifies passivity or weakness. But I think it's just the opposite. With this vigil, certainly, we have such a transactional society. It's always who can speak loudest and speak most and get the most eyeballs and most ears to pay attention and the most people to buy it. Silence is unusual. And I think that is part of the impact of this visual. I think it has and is having an impact on town. When people pass by, I think that, that everybody responds, by the way, whether they're silent or not silent in their vocal or not vocal in their passing by, you can tell there's a response by everyone. Nobody goes by neutrally. Many people will stop. They'll honk their horns if they're passing by in a car, or they'll stop, they'll wave, they'll smile, give a thumbs up if they're walking by. And sometimes people stop and talk to someone who's sitting on the vigil. If that's the case, someone on vigil will go over and actually go apart from the group because the vigil is silent and speak quietly with this person. Maybe invite them to come and join if they wish, but at any rate, speak with that person. And then other people can really tell, even if they say nothing, what they're feeling about this vigil is. You can tell by the body language immediately. And so many people seem to appreciate it. And then there are those who don't. There are some people who speak up, who have even harassed those of us on the vigil, those people on the vigil. Nothing, to my knowledge, has ever been serious. And I think that part of that is because it's really hard to harass somebody who's saying nothing, who's not responding, which is what happens on the vigil. It's silent. And there's another factor, which actually I found somewhat of a relief, nice to know, and that is that the police literally have our backs. There is an office of the police, Charlottesville Police, in the courthouse right behind us. So maybe that too is a factor. I think the most moving or outstanding single event of the vigil for me And again, I was only there for a few months, several months last year, but it happened last July. And as preface, I'll say, we all are very aware of the longstanding public bitter outcry about the statues in Charlottesville. Stonewall Jackson and Robert E. Lee, Confederate generals. And also a less muted, but no less bitter response was about the statue that sat of Lewis and Clark with Sacagawea, the Shoshone woman who led them westward to the Pacific, crouching at their feet. Really obnoxious statue. So there's much to say about historically about this statue, but I'm not going to do that. What did happen, though, was if we fast forward the public outcry, the Unite the Right rally of 2017. And then finally, last July, the statues were removed. The Lee and Jackson statues were transported out of town to a secret holding place until their future was to be decided. The statues were removed last July the 10th. On the following Wednesday, we were sitting Vigil, and we noticed more police activity than usual there. I mean, they're usually coming and going to the police at that point, but it was just more than usual. And then one of the policemen stopped and waved and smiled to us. And this was really unusual, like, whoops, something's about to happen. And we didn't know what, he didn't say. And then a few minutes later, a huge flatbed truck came up Jefferson Avenue, turned the corner onto Park Avenue, right where we were sitting, in front of Zero Court Square. And it was carrying the pedestals of the Lee and Jackson statues. We knew right away what this was. And we all stood up and either cheered or kind of bowed, just in honor of what was passing before us. And the truck went very slowly past. And then it turned up again, Jefferson Avenue, going out of town. I have to say, I thought at the time, and still think, this seems to me a tremendous honoring of the historical atrocities that happened there, that they would bring these pedestals by that building. And I understand that's the same journey that the statues had taken the Saturday before out of town, right by the farmer slave corners market. And it also seemed to me, and again, maybe I'm just reading into it, but I thought that they chose to move the pedestals on the 1 hour of the week when we on Vigil were present. Didn't seem to me to be a coincidence. Just possibly, this was also an acknowledgement of the Vigil and what we've been doing on the Vigil and our heart in that. A few weeks after this event, I went to the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts in Richmond to see an exhibit called The Dirty South. And in that exhibit, I want to mention one particular exhibit that powerfully impacted me. It was called A Coronation Theme, organon by an artist named Nadine Robinson. And what it was a whole group of speakers arranged against a wall in its own room in the shape of the facade of Ebenezer Baptist Church, where Martin Luther King was pastor. And playing over these speakers, this was a sonic piece, playing over these speakers was a collage of shouts, of protest moves, and of screams and sermons, and interwoven amidst it all was the magnificent, solemn music of Handel's coronation anthem. And the impact on me, it seemed just overwhelming. It felt like a sacred moment. And for me, that was exactly the same feeling I had when the pedestals passed. So this is something I know I will always remember, both that, the passing of the pedestals, and this magnificent sonic exhibit. At the vigil, everyone carries a sign, or two, sometimes three. Many of these signs are professionally made, like Black Lives Matter. And some of them are made by those of us who have created them ourselves. I created a sign and carried it that said loving in script in red letters. And I used the word loving purposely, not love, because it wasn't meant as a directive, but it was meant as an invitation, as an inquiry into what is it that it means to love in this place of atrocity. And I will say, this was my contemplation when I sat vigil. The Buddha, in one of his discourses, it's in the middle-length discourses in one of his discourses, called the Simile of the Saw, made an uncompromising statement about loving kindness. He said, even if bandits were savagely severing your limbs with a two-handled saw, it is really explicit, with a two-handled saw, your mind should be imbued with loving kindness for the bandits and for the world. And then he added, anyone who gives rise to a mind of hate toward the bandits, quote, would not be carrying out my teachings. This is so strong. I actually want to read you this passage from the scripture itself. And he said, even if bandits were to sever you savagely limb by limb with a two-handled saw, he who gave rise to a mind of hate toward them, the bandits, would not be carrying out my teaching. You should train thus. Our minds will remain unaffected, and we shall utter no evil words. We shall abide compassionate for their welfare with a mind of loving kindness, without inner hate. Starting with them, the bandits, we shall abide pervading the all-encompassing world with a mind imbued with loving kindness, without hostility and without ill will. That is how you should train. So I said, truly an uncompromising statement. You're not following his teaching, the Buddha's teaching, if you're experiencing ill will and hate with someone who is inflicting so much pain and possibly killing you. Like, wow, what a statement. So this was a reflection, mine, as I said on the vigil. Before I go on to that though, I want to point out, by this statement, the Buddha did not mean take no action. It means that whatever action you do take it with love. That's a really important distinction, I think, that we need to make. He's not saying don't do anything. Do whatever you do with love. So going back to the vigil, I understand that at its core, the vigil is about loving. That beneath all the outrage that we feel, the revulsion and the grief, and about the fear and the injustice that has existed and still does exist today for certain, all of it is grounded in love. Ultimately, we are one, not just human beings, but all beings, human and non-human. all the multiplicity and diversity of us, we all share the light of consciousness at different levels, to be sure, but we all share consciousness. And the expression of consciousness of our shared being is love. That's not a thought. Love, that what I'm saying now is not a thought, and it's not a theory or a theology. It's a direct, wordless truth that can be experienced. And I'll say, even if we feel, oh, but I haven't experienced that, our hearts know it is the truth. The heart knows it, even while our minds, even when and while our minds are clouded with ideas and opinions and reactions. So, what is the implication of all of this for us, for me, for you, for us, for me, as we said on the vigil, for us in daily life? And I'll say the aim of daily life, as I understand it, and bearing in mind these truths, is to align ourselves with these truths, aligning and attempting to align. I'm not saying we just flip a switch and do it, but this is the effort, is to align ourselves with these powerful ultimate truths, aligning our thoughts, our actions, and our speech with the love that in fact we already are. We don't have to go search for it. It's there, even if we haven't felt like we've gotten really in touch with it. It's there, and the heart knows it. And when that happens, when we begin to align, then it's an amazing thing happens. An evolution begins to happen within us, naturally. Not like you make it happen or I make it happen, just naturally. We begin to become more of what we are aligning with, slowly. I mean slowly. This is a lifetime. It'll take years. It doesn't happen overnight. But you know it's real when it's happening. And gradually over time, this is what we begin to reflect. That love, that shared presence. We just begin to naturally reflect, not because we're trying, but because that's the way it is. We reflect it not only for ourselves, but for all beings. And isn't that the Bodhisattva aspiration? The aspiration of the Bodhisattva to respond to the cries of the world, the suffering of all beings. So coming back to the vigil and the implications, and I'll say, it's one thing to know and to be sitting here and telling you these truths. And it can be very much a different thing when it comes down to the specifics and you're sitting in the vigil and you're looking at this place where these people have been sold and you bear in mind the atrocities. And moreover, I knew, not talking about myself, I knew that my heart naturally opens to those who were sold as slaves in this place. But how, I asked myself many times, could my heart possibly open to those who sold them? How could it open to the traders? That was a consistent question. And there was a lot of struggle in my contemplation, my struggle at the vigil. And I will say, I know the answer. And the answer is that loving doesn't exclude hate. It doesn't exclude aversion. That sounds and is a contradiction on one level, because we always conventionally think that there is kind of a continuum, right? There is hate and aversion on the one side, there's neutrality, there's liking, and then there's love. It's linear. And there, on the conventional level, there's always an object of our feeling. If we hate someone. If we love someone. Or if we're neutral about something. There's an object. But the loving that I'm referring to now, the one that the sign was referring to, it didn't involve an object. It was really referring to the loving that we can liken to the sun, which shines on everything indiscriminately. Not whether it likes or doesn't like, which of course the sun doesn't, but that's the loving that is being referred to, and the one I'm convinced the Buddha was talking about as well. Simply loving. And then he said, one who gives rise to feelings of hate or aversion is not following my teachings. Wow. So it's unconditional, is what he is saying. What an uncomfortable truth for us to try to live with and live in our daily life. Because it follows from that the atrocities that were perpetrated at Court Square were perpetrated not only on those beings who were enslaved in the past, but in a way they were perpetrated on us who are sitting there as well in the present. We can feel that in our heart. Our very response and the power of response shows that. What about the other atrocities? And I'm thinking now about the atrocities, genocide of Indigenous Americans. Only on Indigenous Americans? Or what about on all of us? It can't simply neatly be separated out. Why? Because what affects one affects all, and isn't limited in time or space. I think that those of us who sit vigil or sat vigil at Court Square experience this to some degree. Okay, I'm no scientist, and it occurred to me that say a word or two there, but I do understand that science is moving in this direction. I mean, back in the early 20th century, Albert Einstein apparently made a response to what was observed as non-local action, when two particles that were not in contact with each other nonetheless responded in exactly the same way. And he called it spooky action at a distance. And since then, I understand science has gone a lot, quantum physics has gone a lot further, talking about possibilities. Okay, enough about trying to say anything relevant about science. I'm not a scientist, and a lot of you probably know a whole lot more than I do about it. But I would like to quote instead a comment that captures the same thing by Father Richard Rohr, a Jesuit priest. And he speaks of reality as communion. And here's what he says. He said, reality as communion is the template and pattern for our entire universe, from atoms to galaxies, and certainly in the human community. Communion, we're all connected. And we know this. We know this on many levels, and what occurred to me was intergenerational trauma. It's not space or time. You think about the Jews in the Holocaust in World War II, the Hutu and the Tutsis in Rwanda in the 90s, and African Americans. This past June, just a few weeks ago, a young man named Jayland Walker, he was 25 years old. He was shot and killed by police as he was fleeing from them in his car. They had accused him of a traffic violation. And he died of 46 gunshot wounds. He was chased by 8 police. 7 of them were white, 1 was black. It was said, and I don't know, I've read conflicting reports, that he fired a gunshot at them. And then some said, well, really, there's not evidence of it. Whatever. My point here is intergenerational trauma. If you were a young Black man stopped for a traffic violation by a white policeman, panic, intergenerational trauma It doesn't take much to know what happens to so many young Black men. Unreasonable. Just panic is panic. Same thing, same way. Our interconnection plays out and perhaps took the life of Jalen Walker. So uncomfortable implications of this unity of being. And there's something further. If we can understand that the implications of brutality that's perpetrated by others on, for example, the enslaved persons, we understand that to be perpetrated on us as well, isn't it also true that the atrocities perpetrated by planters and others at Court Square were also perpetrated by us? Not only on us, but can we not understand that we might have been in the place of those planters? Same principle, isn't it? One being. We all carry the same elements of greed and self-hatred, ignorance. I will say that in response to, and this was something that came up to my mind often during the contemplation, and my mind often says, oh no, I could never do that. I couldn't be in that place of a planter doing that, committing atrocities. But then there's another voice that says, couldn't I? If I had lived in that day and age, if I had been a wealthy planter in Virginia, if I had had slaves on my plantation, might I not have been standing in Court Square behind a slave, an enslaved person? If I had been the wife or daughter of a wealthy planter on a plantation in Virginia, might I not have just accepted my privilege as the way things were? And as I said, I don't want to think that. I want to think absolutely not. But then I have to admit, I think the reality is maybe, I don't know. I can't know, but it might have been. And I come back to my own life, and I know that in my younger years, I was unaware of my white privilege. And our family hired a woman named Florence, an elderly Black woman who came weekly to clean the house. And she was overweight. She moved with difficulty, and she was always kind, very kind. And I, in my young years, being busy with my own life, really didn't think much about it. I didn't question it. This is just the way it was for me. I've thought about that often personally. So that makes me wonder, is it not true maybe for all of us? Is it not useful for all of us to inquire about ourselves? How do we know? How do we know for sure what we would have done if we were in those places? How we might have been conditioned? Would we have done it differently? And the point here is not to feel guilty. I know it's not, this is what I remind myself time and again, this is not about guilt. Guilt is a confused response. Guilt is debilitating and unwholesome. We need to bring the same compassion to ourselves that I'm talking about here, about bringing it to others. But there's also a bigger truth involved here, and it's the beautiful truth of interconnection. We're all interconnected in the web of existence, and we can choose to commit ourselves to being the truest and most compassionate expression of that truth that we possibly can. We're all connected in the web of existence. So here is a poem. That's something we've heard before. I'm going to read parts of it again. Thich Nhat Hanh, please call me by my true names. Don't say that I will depart tomorrow. Even today, I'm still arriving. Look deeply. Every second I am arriving to be a bud on a spring branch, to be a tiny bird with the still fragile wings, to be a jewel hiding itself in a stone. I am a frog swimming happily in the clear water of a pond, and I am the grass snake that silently feeds upon the frog. I am the child in Uganda, all skin and bones, my legs thin as bamboo sticks, and I am the arms merchant selling deadly weapons to Uganda. I am the 12-year-old girl, refugee on a small boat, who throws herself into the ocean after being raped by a sea pirate. And I am the pirate, my heart not yet capable of seeing and loving. I'm a member of the Politburo with plenty of power in my hands. And I'm a man who has to pay his debt of blood to my people dying slowly in a forced labor camp. My joy is like spring, so warm it makes flowers bloom all over the earth. My pain is like a river of tears, so vast it fills the 4 oceans. Please call me by my true names, so I can hear all my cries and laughter at once, so I can see that my joy and pain are one. Please call me by my true names, so I can wake up and the door of my heart could be left open, the door of compassion. And in these few minutes I have left, I want to conclude with something else, bringing us absolutely up to date. Today, in this era, in this time of new suns, that's a quote from a woman, an activist, thinker named Adrienne Marie Brown. She was interviewed, she had a conversation with Krista Tippett in June in On Being. And in her blog, Adrienne Marie Brown wrote, "The palpable, active, ongoing grief is a non-negotiable part of this period of immense change. Grief is one of the most beautiful and difficult ways we love. As we grieve, we feel our humanity and connection to each other, building the path from this heartbreaking present to a future where we center our collective existence in love and care is where we come in." And I would only add to that last sentence, building the word and personal, building the path from this heartbreaking present to a future where we center our personal and collective existence in love and care is where we come in. So, thank you for listening. We have a minute left. Does anybody have a comment to make in this 1 minute? Then thank you, friends. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.